The 1960s may have been a golden age for cars, but not every model was a hit. Some were plagued by bizarre designs, questionable engineering, and features that left drivers scratching their heads. These cars weren't just bad, they were downright goofy, earning a special place in automotive history for all the wrong reasons. Get ready to explore the 13 worst and goofiest cars from the 1960s, from around the world. From oddball shapes to laughable performance, these vehicles will leave you wondering how they ever made it off the production line. When I first laid eyes on the P50, I honestly didn't know what to make of it. At first glance, it looked more like a toy than an actual car, a miniature, almost absurd creation. The P50, the world's smallest production car, is only 134 centimeters long, which is shorter than some modern motorcycles. With its 3 wheels, single seat, and absence of a reverse gear, it seemed more like an experiment in car design than a practical mode of transportation. Yet despite all its quirks, I couldn't help but be fascinated by it. There was something undeniably intriguing about this tiny relic from the 1960s. Designed with the intention of being an affordable and compact vehicle for the crowded streets of the Isle of Man, the P50 was part of a wave of microcars that were gaining popularity in Europe at the time. In theory, it was meant to be a solution to the post-war need for smaller, more efficient vehicles. However, the reality of owning and driving one is a far cry from the idea of a practical urban car. This isn't a vehicle meant for the everyday commuter or anyone seeking comfort or reliability. Instead, the P50 is a true novelty, a quirky piece of automotive history that has more in common with a fun toy than a car. Driving the P50 is an experience unlike any other. To begin with, it only has one seat. Yes, just one. This isn't a car for family trips or group outings. There's no room for passengers, so if you're looking for a practical ride for 2 or more, the P50 isn't it. It's also worth noting that it lacks a reverse gear, meaning that if you want to back up, you'll have to get out of the car and physically turn it around. Or if you're in a tight spot, pull it by the handle at the back. It's a process that quickly grows tiresome, but it adds to the charm and absurdity of the experience. The tiny size of the P50 also means that, while it can be incredibly nimble in tight spaces, it feels cramped and uncomfortable for anyone over average height. As someone who's over 6 feet tall, getting in and out of the car was a challenge. Once inside, it's not exactly a luxurious experience. The interior is bare bones, with just the essentials. No air conditioning, no modern features, and certainly no room for anything more than a very small bag. It feels more like sitting in a child's toy car than a functional vehicle. And while that's part of the fun, it's hard to ignore just how impractical it is for real-world use. There's also the issue of its speed and power, or rather, the lack thereof. The P50's tiny engine, which was only 49 cubic centimeters, doesn't exactly offer a thrilling driving experience. The car's top speed is about 30 miles per hour, which means it's not exactly built for highway driving or long trips. It's more of a novelty for short, leisurely drives around town. But even then, the experience can be frustrating. The lack of comfort, limited space, and the constant struggle to navigate in reverse make the P50 more of an amusement than a serious mode of transport. But despite all its flaws, the P50 has an undeniable charm. It's hard not to smile when you see it. It's so small, so strange, that it's impossible to look at without feeling a sense of wonder. People stare at it in disbelief, often taking pictures and laughing at its impossibly tiny size. It turns heads wherever you go, and for a moment, you're transported into the past, to a time when cars were designed to be quirky, experimental, and full of personality. The P50 may not be practical, but it certainly stands out in a world of cookie-cutter vehicles. As a collector's item, the P50 is a fascinating piece of history. It represents a time when car manufacturers were pushing the boundaries of what was possible, even if those boundaries didn't always make sense. It's a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the engineers behind it. However, as a vehicle for everyday use, the P50 falls short. It's impractical, uncomfortable, and often frustrating to drive. If you're looking for a car that will get you from point A to point B in a reasonable amount of time and comfort, this is not it. But if you're looking for something unique, something that makes a statement and turns heads, then the Peel P50 is definitely a car worth considering, though perhaps only as a collector's oddity or a fun conversation piece, rather than a serious means of transport. Ultimately, the Peel P50 is the embodiment of automotive whimsy. It's a car that doesn't take itself seriously, and neither should you when you're behind the wheel. It's more about the experience, the laughs, and the nostalgia for a time when the world was fascinated by quirky tiny cars. But as for being a practical, everyday vehicle, it's safe to say the Peel P50 isn't that, and probably never will be. When I first came across the Amphicar 770, I had to take a moment to process what I was looking at. A car that could drive on both land and water? It sounded like something straight out of a James Bond movie, or perhaps a futuristic dream that never quite materialized. The Amphicar 770, produced from 1961 to 1968, was truly a marvel of its time. An amphibious vehicle designed to let you cruise down the road and then glide across the water without skipping a beat. But as much as it sounded like a fantastic idea, it quickly became clear that this two-in-one vehicle was more of a quirky novelty than a practical solution. The concept of a car that could function as both a land and water vehicle is undeniably cool. The Amphicar 770 was equipped with a 1.1-liter, four-cylinder engine that powered both its wheels and its propellers. On land, it was a relatively standard car for the 1960s, able to reach speeds of about 70 miles per hour. But when you hit the water, things became interesting. In theory, the Amphicar was capable of floating and moving across calm lakes or rivers, but in practice, it was much slower and less stable than most people might have imagined. Its maximum speed in the water was about 7 knots, a far cry from the thrill of speeding across a lake. Driving the Amphicar was a unique experience. On land, it handled like a typical 1960s compact car, but it never quite offered the smooth modern ride that you might expect from a car of that era. On the water, however, it was anything but a smooth sailing experience. The quirky design meant that it wasn't particularly streamlined in the water, and it felt more like a floating, motorized boat than a real car-boat hybrid. Turning the car into a boat involved a few extra steps, and once in the water, it was easy to feel the lack of control, especially when dealing with currents or waves. It certainly wasn't something you could rely on for high-speed water escapades or leisurely boating, and that's where the Amphicar's biggest flaw lies. But despite all these shortcomings, the Amphicar was, without a doubt, an eye-catching oddity. Its design was unmistakable, with its bubble-like rear end and boat-like features. Driving it through a town or by the shore was an instant attention grabber. You couldn't help but laugh and smile at how unique it was, and it quickly became a conversation starter. People stared in wonder, many perhaps questioning how it actually worked and whether they could trust it to float. While it wasn't great at being either a car or a boat, it had a kind of charm that made people forget about its flaws, even if just for a moment. From a practical standpoint, though, the Amphicar was, well, impractical. It wasn't fast enough to serve as a functional boat, and it didn't offer the level of comfort or convenience you'd expect from a regular car. If you wanted to drive across land and then head straight into the water, the Amphicar was more of a quirky experiment than a viable transportation solution. While it was fun to drive and cool to own, it wasn't something you'd want to rely on for everyday use, not unless you were looking for a constant reminder of what happens when innovation outpaces practicality. As a collector's item, however, the Amphicar holds a special place. It's a reminder of a time when people dreamed of combining the best of two worlds into one vehicle. It's a quirky, nostalgic piece of automotive history that blends two forms of transportation in the most unlikely of ways. But for anyone looking for something that truly excels at either driving or boating, the Amphicar falls short. It's an interesting experiment and a fun piece of history, but as far as everyday usability goes, it's not the best of either worlds. In the end, the Amphicar 770 is an automotive oddity that will forever remain a fun, quirky relic from the past. It's not practical, it's not efficient, but it's undeniably memorable. It's the kind of vehicle that, despite its flaws, brings a smile to your face every time you see it, whether it's cruising down the road or slowly making its way across a lake. When I first encountered the Citroën Ami 6, I couldn't help but feel a mix of confusion and fascination. The Ami 6, produced from 1961 to 1969, was a peculiar creation that sat awkwardly between two icons of French automotive history, the utilitarian 2CV and the elegant DS. The idea behind the Ami 6 was to offer a small family car with more comfort and style than the 2CV, while not quite reaching the luxury of the DS. But what really stood out was its design, which was so unusual that it often left people scratching their heads. The Ami 6 was the kind of car that, the more you looked at it, the more surreal it seemed. The defining feature of the Ami 6 is undoubtedly its rear window. In a bold and unconventional move, Citroën designed the rear window to be inverted, slanting backward at a steep angle. While the reasoning behind this odd design choice was to improve aerodynamics and to help keep the rear window clean in rainy conditions, it only added to the car's strange, almost cartoonish appearance. Instead of having the smooth, flowing lines you might expect from a family car, the Ami 6's rear end looked almost like it had been reversed. A visual trick that left many people puzzled and amused. The backward slanting rear window was so out of place that it almost seemed as though Citroën had simply forgotten to design it properly. But it wasn't just the rear window that made the Ami 6 so quirky. Its front grille, thin and spindly, like a bug's antennae, gave the car a slightly insectoid look. The elongated headlights paired with the grille made it resemble a bug-eyed alien from another planet. The proportions were all off. The car's body seemed to have been stretched in the wrong places, giving it an awkward, gangly silhouette that didn't quite make sense in terms of traditional car design. Despite these oddities, however, the Ami 6 managed to be endearing in its own way. There was something undeniably charming about its strange looks. You couldn't look at it without at least appreciating the boldness of its design. Yet despite its bizarre appearance, the Ami 6 became surprisingly popular in France. It was not just an oddball, it was a practical, affordable family car that had a unique personality. Citroën's distinctive suspension system gave the Ami 6 its famously bouncy, floaty ride, making it feel like you were driving on clouds. This suspension was typical of Citroëns of the era, and it became one of the car's defining characteristics, adding to the quirky driving experience. The Ami 6 also offered a level of comfort and efficiency that made it a viable choice for families, despite its eccentric design. In fact, the Ami 6 was so popular in France that it set sales records during its production run. It appealed to buyers who wanted something more modern than the 2CV, but didn't need the luxury or price tag of the DS. The Ami 6 was affordable, practical, and most importantly, it was a car that stood out from the crowd. It wasn't just a way to get from point A to point B. It was a statement, a car that made its own rules and didn't conform to the usual standards of car design. It was this sense of individuality that gave the Ami 6 its lasting appeal, even if its looks made people do a double take. As an owner, driving the Ami 6 was an experience unlike any other. The car's ride was as unique as its design, bouncy and soft, but never quite smooth in the way you'd expect from more conventional cars. It was a car that made you feel every bump in the road, but in a way that was oddly comforting. The engine, though modest by today's standards, was perfectly adequate for city driving, and the car's small size made it easy to navigate narrow streets, a huge advantage in crowded French cities. But while the Ami 6 was functional and fun to drive, its design was never quite normal. You constantly felt as if you were behind the wheel of a concept car, something that had yet to be fully understood by the masses. The Citroën Ami 6 will always be remembered as one of the most quirky and eccentric cars of its time. It wasn't a masterpiece of conventional design, nor was it the sleek, stylish car that appealed to mainstream tastes. Instead, it was a car that took risks, broke the mold, and carved out its own path in the automotive world. It may have looked like a strange hybrid of a bug-eyed alien and a family car, but it found its place in the hearts of French drivers, proving that sometimes oddities are exactly what people need. Despite its unusual looks, the Ami 6 was a practical, reliable, and undeniably charming vehicle. and that's what made it truly special. The Citroën DS Decapitable, a convertible version of the legendary Citroën DS, is a car that immediately captivates anyone who lays eyes on it. Produced in the 1960s, it took the already futuristic DS and turned it into something even more dramatic. A car that combined the elegance of a convertible with the innovative technology and avant-garde design that made the DS such an iconic vehicle. But while the DS Decapitable is undeniably beautiful, it also has some quirks that make it just a little goofy, and in the best way possible. The first thing that stands out about the DS Decapitable is its striking appearance. The convertible roof only adds to the car's already otherworldly look, with its long, flowing lines and distinctive, almost spaceship-like silhouette. It looks like a car from a science fiction movie, not something that would be cruising the streets of Paris in the 1960s. The hydropneumatic suspension system, a signature feature of the DS, gives the car a smooth, floaty ride, but it also causes it to rise and fall as the car moves. This feature, while offering an incredibly comfortable driving experience, creates the almost comical effect of the car bowing as it rolls along, as if the car itself were acknowledging the onlookers with a courteous nod. It's an effect that adds to the surreal quality of the car, making it seem as though it's too advanced for its time, or perhaps too advanced for our time. But it's not just the suspension that makes the DS Decapitable feel otherworldly. The entire design of the car was ahead of its time, with its smooth curves, sharp angles, and angular headlights that looked like something out of a space-age vision of the future. When you look at the DS Decapitable, it's impossible not to think of a spaceship on wheels. In fact, the car was so futuristic that it often drew comparisons to a UFO, not just because of its shape, but because of the cutting-edge engineering beneath the surface. The hydropneumatic suspension was revolutionary, providing a ride that was unlike anything else at the time. And the fact that it could be paired with the open-air freedom of a convertible made it a car that was both stylish and technical, futuristic and grounded in reality. As an owner of the DS Decapitable, you can't help but feel as though you're behind the wheel of a car that's more than just a mode of transportation. It's an experience. The sensation of driving the DS Decapitable is unlike anything else. The car floats down the road with an almost ethereal quality, its suspension gliding over bumps and imperfections in a way that feels like you're driving on clouds. Yet while it's incredibly smooth, the way the car rises and falls gives it a playful, almost theatrical presence on the road. It's as if the car itself is performing for you, putting on a show as it moves. The convertible nature of the DS Decapitable only enhances the sense of drama. With the top down, you feel connected to the road in a way that you wouldn't in a regular DS. You're not just driving a car, you're in a piece of automotive history, a car that was as much about design and innovation as it was about driving pleasure. The wind in your hair, the hum of the engine, and the otherworldly look of the car create a driving experience that feels like something from the future. But it's a future that's already here. However, despite its many strengths, the DS Decapitable wasn't without its flaws. The hydropneumatic suspension, while smooth, was prone to occasional issues, and the system could be expensive to maintain. And though the car's performance was impressive, it was never meant to be a speedster. It was designed more for comfort and style, a car to be driven leisurely, with an emphasis on smooth, relaxed driving rather than quick acceleration. Still, for those who owned a DS Decapitable, these were small inconveniences compared to the unique experience the car offered. The Citroën DS Decapitable is, without question, one of the most beautiful and unique cars ever made. It took an already groundbreaking car and made it even more dramatic, combining futuristic design, innovative technology, and open-air freedom in a way that no other car could at the time. While its high-drop pneumatic suspension gave it a peculiar, bowing effect, and its design made it feel like something from another era. Those very quirks are what made the DS Decapitable such a beloved piece of automotive history. It was a car that wasn't afraid to be different, that embraced its futuristic nature without apology, and that left everyone who saw it or drove it in awe of what a car could be. The Messerschmitt KR200 is one of those cars that immediately grabs your attention, leaving you either laughing in disbelief or marveling at the sheer audacity of its design. Produced between 1955 and 1964, the KR200 was a three-wheeled microcar that pushed the boundaries of what a car could be, though its size, design, and quirky features often made it more of a novelty than a serious mode of transportation. But despite all its shortcomings, the KR200 became a beloved icon of its time. Not because it was practical, fast, or comfortable, but because it was unlike anything else on the road. At first glance, the KR200 looks less like a car and more like a miniature fighter jet that somehow ended up on the road. The tiny bubble-shaped canopy and the enclosed cockpit, where the driver sat in a tandem configuration, one behind the other, gave the KR200 an unmistakable, futuristic appearance. Its design was so distinctive that it almost seemed like a ride from an amusement park rather than a functional vehicle. With its sleek, streamlined body and exaggerated curves, the KR200 was an odd sight to behold. And it's not hard to see why people who saw it for the first time couldn't help but smile at its sheer goofiness. But the real charm of the KR200 lies in just how impractical it was. The car had a 191 cubic centimeter single-cylinder engine that could produce a mere 10 horsepower, which was enough to propel it to a top speed of around 50 miles per hour. While that might sound decent on paper, in reality, it was painfully slow. Trying to merge onto a highway, let alone keep up with modern traffic, was out of the question. And with its three-wheeled design, the KR200 had a tendency to lean awkwardly during sharp turns, making it feel more like a scooter than a car. The cramped interior was another issue. The tandem seating arrangement meant that the driver and passenger were both packed into a tiny space, and even for two people of average size, the experience was uncomfortable at best. The lack of space didn't stop at the seating. The KR200 was so small that even the most basic necessities of car ownership, like storage or legroom, were virtually non-existent. The tiny engine was barely sufficient for getting around town, and the car didn't offer any sort of suspension system, meaning every bump or pothole on the road was felt in full force. It's the kind of car that you had to drive with a sense of humor, as its quirks and shortcomings were simply part of the experience. Despite all of these limitations, there was a certain magic to the KR200. It wasn't built for speed or comfort, but it was undeniably fun to drive. The novelty of being inside such a tiny, quirky vehicle, with the bubble canopy above you and the tiny steering wheel in front of you, made it feel like you were in your own little world. The KR200's absurdity was part of what made it so charming. You couldn't take it too seriously, and that's what made it enjoyable. From a practical standpoint, the Messerschmitt KR200 was anything but practical. It was a microcar designed for a time when Europe was recovering from the aftermath of World War II and needed affordable, small vehicles to navigate crowded streets. It was designed to be cheap and efficient, but it wasn't built for long drives, comfort, or speed. It was a vehicle made for short trips, for getting from one place to another with as little fuss as possible. In that regard, it succeeded, but its slow speed, lack of comfort, and unusual design made it more of a quirky historical artifact than a reliable car. Yet the KR200 left a lasting impression on those who drove it, or even just saw it on the road. It was a car that didn't take itself too seriously, a vehicle that you couldn't help but laugh at while driving. And in turn, it made everyone who saw it smile. In a world full of cars that all looked the same, the KR200 was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that cars didn't always have to be practical or sleek to be fun or interesting. As a collector's item today, the Messerschmitt KR200 holds a unique place in automotive history. Its distinctive design, bizarre, three-wheeled layout, and humorous approach to driving make it a true oddity in the world of cars. It wasn't practical, it wasn't fast, and it certainly wasn't comfortable, but that's what made it so endearing. The KR200 is the perfect example of a car that was built with the spirit of fun and experimentation, even if that meant sacrificing practicality. And in a way, that's exactly what makes it such a beloved piece of automotive history. It's goofy, it's quirky, and it's unforgettable. When you look at the Fiat Multipla 600, it's hard not to do a double take. Produced between 1956 and 1969, the Multipla was an ambitious attempt at creating a compact family car that could accommodate 6 passengers in a space no larger than your typical hatchback. At the time, it was a revolutionary concept. A small, affordable car that could fit a family without taking up the massive amount of space that was typical of larger cars. But despite its innovative design, the Fiat Multipla quickly became one of the quirkiest and most amusing vehicles of the 20th century. The first thing that strikes you about the Multipla is its proportions. It's tall, narrow, and oddly shaped, a combination of features that make it look more like a cartoon car than a serious family vehicle. With its squat, boxy body and large rounded windows, the Multipla resembled a minivan decades before minivans were even a concept. The car's design looks almost like someone took a standard Fiat 600 and simply stretched the top half, resulting in a car that seems to be perpetually on tiptoes, as though it's trying to stand taller than its tiny frame allows. It's an awkward look, and yet there's something undeniably endearing about it. It's as if the car was trying too hard to be a family vehicle, and in doing so, it became more of a curiosity than a practical solution. Inside, the Multipla's cabin was as quirky as its exterior. Fiat managed to squeeze 6 seats into a car that was barely longer than the average compact car of the time, but it did so with some unusual design choices. The seating arrangement was unconventional, with 3 seats in the front and 3 in the back, arranged in a way that made the Multipla feel more like a minibus than a traditional car. While this made the Multipla incredibly practical for larger families, it also resulted in a cramped and less than comfortable experience for anyone sitting in the back. The narrow interior meant that passengers were packed in close together and legroom was at a premium. The small, upright seats didn't do much to improve comfort either, especially on longer trips. Driving the Fiat Multipla was, to put it mildly, an experience. With its small 633 cubic centimeter engine, the car wasn't exactly a speed demon. It had just enough power to get you around town, but anything resembling high-speed driving was out of the question. The engine, though modest, was designed for efficiency rather than performance, and the car was built to be a practical city runabout rather than a road warrior. On the road, the Multipla handled surprisingly well for its size, though the combination of its tall, narrow shape and relatively short wheelbase could make it feel a bit unstable, especially at higher speeds or on winding roads. Despite its oddities, the Fiat Multipla was a commercial success, particularly in Italy, where it became a popular choice for families. It was affordable, practical, and offered a level of versatility that few cars of its size could match. The compact size made it easy to park and navigate narrow streets, a huge benefit in crowded European cities. And while the Multipla's design wasn't exactly beautiful, it did have a certain charm, an undeniable quirkiness that made it stand out from the crowd. The tall, boxy shape and unusual proportions became a defining characteristic, and over time the Multipla developed a loyal following of fans who appreciated its unique style. But let's be clear, the Fiat Multipla was not the most comfortable or stylish car out there. The cramped interior, lack of power, and unusual design meant that it was far from being a car that everyone could love. Yet despite all of its shortcomings, the Multipla succeeded because it fulfilled a very specific need. It provided a small, affordable way for families to travel together. And in that sense, it was ahead of its time. It may not have been the most beautiful car, but it was certainly one of the most practical and, in many ways, it was a precursor to the minivan, a car that would become a staple for families around the world decades later. As a collector's item today, the Fiat Multipla has achieved a kind of cult status. Its quirky design and unusual proportions have turned it into an automotive oddity, a reminder of a time when manufacturers were willing to take bold risks in pursuit of new ideas. It may not have been the most elegant or comfortable car, but it was one of the most innovative vehicles of its era, and for that, it deserves a place in automotive history. The Fiat Multipla 600 is goofy, awkward, and undeniably charming. A car that proved that practicality and personality could go hand in hand. The Bond Bug is one of those cars that you simply can't ignore, and for all the right reasons. Produced in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Bond Bug was a small, three-wheeled microcar with a distinctive wedge-shaped design that made it stand out like a sore thumb on the roads. It was a car that pushed the boundaries of conventional design, combining futuristic styling with an oddball three-wheeled layout that seemed more like something out of a sci-fi movie than a real-world vehicle. And while it was certainly goofy, the Bond Bug's charm lies in how unapologetically quirky it was. The first thing you'll notice about the Bond Bug is its striking, bright orange color, one of the car's most iconic features. This vivid shade of orange, paired with the sleek, wedge-shaped body, made the Bond Bug look like it belonged in a space-age adventure rather than on the streets of the UK. It was a car that practically screamed attention, and in a way, that was exactly what it wanted. The design was cutting-edge for its time, with smooth aerodynamic lines and a low-slung stance that gave it a futuristic vibe. It looked like it was ready to launch off into the unknown, rather than trundling down a country road. But it wasn't just the color or the body that made the Bond Bug so quirky. The most notable feature, and perhaps the one that makes it look the most unusual, is its canopy-style door. Instead of the traditional side-opening door, the Bond Bug had a door that lifted upwards, much like the kind of door you might find on a fighter jet or a sci-fi spaceship. It was a dramatic, eye-catching feature that added to the car's sense of theatricality, making it feel like an out-of-this-world creation. Getting in and out of the car involved some acrobatic maneuvering as the door swung up and over your head, but that was part of the charm. It wasn't practical, but it sure was fun. Underneath the eye-catching exterior, the Bond Bug had a modest 700cc, four-stroke engine that produced a mere 29 horsepower. This gave the car a top speed of around 60 miles per hour, which, though sufficient for city driving and short trips, wasn't exactly going to win any races. With its three-wheel design, the Bond Bug was stable enough on flat roads but could feel a bit wobbly when taking sharp turns or navigating bumpy terrain. Despite this, it was surprisingly nimble, and its small size made it easy to park and maneuver in tight spaces, much like a scooter, but with more of a real car feel. Driving the Bond Bug was a unique experience. The three-wheel configuration meant it had a different handling characteristic than a traditional four-wheeled vehicle. It felt more like driving a motorcycle with the stability of a car. But that could be a bit unnerving for anyone unaccustomed to three-wheeled vehicles. The car was extremely lightweight, and despite its small engine, could still pack a punch when it came to cornering. But of course, it wasn't built for high-speed thrills. It was built for fun, practicality, and a bit of flair. The low center of gravity and unique design made it feel like a toy car for adults. Something to zip around town in with a grin plastered on your face. Despite its oddities, the Bond Bug was surprisingly practical for its time. It was an affordable, economical alternative to traditional cars, perfect for people looking for a cheap and efficient way to get around. Its small size made it ideal for crowded city streets, and it was easy to park virtually anywhere. The three-wheel design also meant that it was cheaper to insure and maintain than a full-size car, which only added to its appeal as a practical, affordable option for budget-conscious drivers. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The Bond Bug's small size and oddball design meant that it wasn't particularly comfortable for long drives. The interior, though functional, was cramped, and there was little in the way of creature comforts. The ride, too, was a bit bumpy, as you might expect from a three-wheeled car. And while the bright orange color was eye-catching, it wasn't exactly subtle, making it difficult for owners to blend into the crowd. Despite its shortcomings, the Bond Bug became something of a cult classic. It was a car that turned heads and made people smile, not because it was a practical or luxurious vehicle, but because it was fun, unusual, and unapologetically different. The Bond Bug represented an era when manufacturers weren't afraid to experiment with new ideas, even if they weren't always practical or mainstream. It was a time when cars could be more than just transportation. They could be an expression of individuality, a bit of whimsy, and a nod to the future. Today, the Bond Bug is remembered as one of the goofiest and most beloved microcars of all time. Its quirky design, fun-to-drive nature, and outlandish features have earned it a place in the hearts of collectors and enthusiasts alike. The Reliant Regal is a car that holds a unique place in the history of British motoring, not necessarily for its engineering brilliance or aesthetic appeal, but for its reputation as a comedic icon. Produced from 1953 to 1973, the Regal was a three-wheeled vehicle that quickly became a symbol of absurdity thanks to its awkward design and tendency to tip over during sharp turns. It was, in many ways, a car that wasn't built to be taken seriously, but that only added to its charm and cultural significance. The first thing that stands out about the Reliant Regal is its lopsided, quirky design. With its narrow three-wheel layout, one wheel at the front and two at the back, the Regal was inherently unstable, especially when cornering at speed. Most famously in the British sitcom Only Fools and Horses, where the character Del Boy would often send the car tumbling over with a well-timed nudge. Despite its unstable handling, the Reliant Regal was far from a joke in terms of practicality. It was designed as a small, affordable car for working-class families who needed a cheap mode of transportation. Its compact size made it ideal for narrow British roads and congested city streets, and its three-wheel design made it cheaper to produce, maintain, and insure. In fact, the Regal was one of the more affordable cars on the market during its time, and its low running costs made it a popular choice for those on a budget. The Regal's three-wheel design, however, was both its blessing and its curse. While it kept costs down, it also meant that the car was far less stable than a four-wheeled vehicle. The single front wheel combined with the two rear wheels created an inherently unstable configuration, which made turning a perilous affair. On tight corners or when taking a bend too quickly, the Regal had a tendency to tip over, often with no more than a mild nudge. This tendency to fall over became a part of its legacy, and it's what made the car the butt of so many jokes. Beyond its unstable handling, the Regal's design was, in many ways, rather charming, though certainly odd. The narrow body and basic structure gave the car a utilitarian, almost utilitarian appearance. It wasn't built for luxury or speed. It was made to get from point A to point B in the most affordable way possible. The interior, though basic, was functional enough for its time, with enough room for two passengers in the front. The rear seats were practically non-existent, leaving very little storage space in the back. The car was powered by a small engine that made it slow, and its lack of power made it even less stable, particularly on hills or in windy conditions. Driving the Reliant Regal wasn't exactly an exciting experience. The car's small engine made it feel underpowered, and its handling left much to be desired. The lack of suspension, combined with its narrow wheelbase, meant that even the smallest bump or pothole could send the Regal into a bit of a shake or wobble. The car's three-wheeled configuration also made it feel more like a motorcycle than a traditional car, especially when navigating tight corners. But despite all this, the Regal was surprisingly practical for its intended use. It was light, easy to park, and small enough to zip around town without much trouble. However, despite its utility, the Regal's most enduring legacy lies in its comedic associations. Over the years, its tipping over became so iconic that it became a cultural stereotype, with TV shows and films portraying the Reliant Regal as a punchline to a joke about small, impractical cars. In fact, the car's vulnerability to tipping over was so well known that it became a favorite target for mischievous drivers, with many reports of people deliberately trying to knock the car over as a prank. Despite this, the Reliant Regal had a more serious side. It was a car designed for people who needed an affordable and reliable mode of transport, and it delivered that in spades. Its three-wheel design made it an economical choice, and it was a practical solution for many people in post-war Britain who didn't have the means to buy a full-fledged car. But its reputation for instability, combined with its oddball design, meant that it was never quite taken seriously. And it's this combination of quirkiness and usefulness that has made the Regal a beloved, albeit comedic, part of British automotive history. Today, the Reliant Regal is more of a historical curiosity than a practical vehicle. The Goggamobile Dart is one of those cars that seems to defy all conventional logic. Produced in Australia between 1959 and 1961, this tiny fiberglass-bodied sports car was an attempt at creating a fun, affordable, and lightweight vehicle for those who desired a little more flair than the typical compact car. However, while it succeeded in offering a unique design, the Dart's diminutive size and toy-like appearance made it more of a novelty than a serious contender in the world of sports cars. At first glance, the Goggamobile Dart looks like something you'd expect to see in a theme park or a miniature racing course, not on a busy highway. Its size alone is enough to make you do a double take. The Dart was so small that it could almost be mistaken for a go-kart or a toy car. It had an ultra-compact body that measured just over 10 feet in length, which made it one of the smallest cars ever produced. While the small footprint made it incredibly easy to maneuver and park, it also gave the Dart an unmistakable toy car vibe. With its low stance, rounded edges, and miniature proportions, the Dart looked more like something you'd find in a child's playset rather than a legitimate sports car. The Dart's design was intended to appeal to drivers looking for an affordable, stylish car that could be used for leisurely drives, but it came across as more of a curiosity than a practical vehicle. The fiberglass body, though lightweight and easy to manufacture, contributed to the Dart's almost cartoonish look. The front end of the car featured a sleek grille and round headlights, but everything about it seemed exaggerated in size. The tires, the body panels, and especially the windows. It looked as if it had been built on a miniature scale, with proportions that made it seem out of place among larger, more traditional vehicles. Under the hood, the Dart wasn't much better at shaking its toy car image. Powered by a small 600cc two-stroke engine, the Goggamobile Dart produced just 26 horsepower, which was more than enough to get the car up to a top speed of about 60 miles per hour. While this speed might have been sufficient for city driving or short jaunts on the open road, it certainly wasn't going to win any races. The Dart's tiny engine, combined with its lightweight, made it a nimble little car, but one that lacked the power or the performance of a true sports car. It was fun to drive, but more in the sense of zipping around town with the wind in your hair rather than going for any serious driving thrills. The small engine and quirky design weren't the Dart's only limitations. The car's cabin was as compact as its exterior, offering limited space for the driver and passenger. While the Dart technically had room for two people, sitting in the cramped cockpit felt more like being strapped into a go-kart than a traditional road car. The seats were basic, and legroom was in short supply. Getting in and out of the car required a bit of contorting, and once inside, the lack of headroom made the experience even more uncomfortable for taller drivers. There was also little storage space, as the rear was mainly taken up by the small engine. On the road, the Goggamobile Dart was surprisingly nimble, thanks to its lightweight and small size. It could dart in and out of traffic with ease, and it was incredibly easy to park in even the tightest spaces. However, the ride was far from luxurious. The suspension, though functional, was basic at best, and the car's small wheels didn't do much to absorb bumps or road imperfections. On rough roads, the Dart could feel bouncy and unstable, which made it less than ideal for long trips or highways. It was much more at home on city streets or leisurely country drives where its diminutive size and playful nature could shine. Despite its somewhat goofy appearance and lackluster performance, the Goggamobile Dart did find a niche market. It was cheap to buy and run, and it offered an affordable way for people to experience the joy of driving a car that was just a little bit different. Its unique design and size meant that it turned heads wherever it went, and in a way, it became a symbol of the kind of carefree, adventurous spirit that defined much of the 1960s. The Dart was never intended to be a serious contender in the sports car market, but it was certainly an interesting alternative for those who wanted something quirky and fun. Today, the Goggamobile Dart is remembered as one of the most endearing oddities in automotive history. Its small size, quirky design, and lighthearted nature have made it a favorite among collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate cars that are just a little bit goofy. While it may not have been a particularly practical car, the Dart certainly left an impression. It was a car that showed that you didn't need to be big or fast to be memorable. In fact, The Goggamobile Dart's charm lay in how unassuming and whimsical it was. The Subaru 360, introduced in 1958, holds a special place in automotive history as the first production car from Subaru. Known affectionately as the Ladybug, due to its round bug-like design and compact size, the 360 became an iconic symbol of the microcar movement in post-war Japan. While its cheerful, cartoonish appearance made it undeniably endearing, the 360's diminutive proportions and quirky characteristics gave it a somewhat goofy and impractical reputation that still resonates with car enthusiasts and collectors today. The most obvious thing about the Subaru 360 is its size. At just 2.8 meters long, about 9 feet, it's hard to imagine that this little car could even qualify as a car in the traditional sense. Its tiny dimensions made it the perfect vehicle for navigating Japan's crowded streets in the 1960s, when most people didn't have access to larger, more expensive cars. Despite being a car, the Subaru 360 often looked more like a toy, with its rounded shape and exaggerated proportions. Its circular headlights, small, bulging fenders, and rounded roofline made it look like a rolling bug or a mascot more than a practical mode of transportation. It was a car that brought joy and whimsy to the roads, even though it wasn't quite the serious vehicle one might expect from an automotive manufacturer. The design of the Subaru 360 was intentionally simple and utilitarian, with the goal of making an affordable vehicle for Japan's rapidly growing middle class. It had a rear-engine, rear-wheel drive configuration powered by a tiny 356 cubic centimeter, two-stroke engine that produced just 25 horsepower. This engine, though incredibly small by modern standards, was barely powerful enough to move the car at a decent pace. With a top speed of around 60 miles per hour, the Subaru 360 was not built for speed, and it had to work hard to get up to even that modest speed. The engine's two-stroke design meant that it was relatively inefficient compared to the more common four-stroke engines of the time, but it kept the car light and affordable. Despite its lack of power, the 360's small size and lightweight made it surprisingly nimble. It could zip around tight corners and fit into the smallest parking spaces, which made it a practical option for navigating congested urban environments. However, the ride was far from luxurious. The car's suspension was basic, and its tiny wheels meant that it didn't absorb road bumps very well. Drivers often found themselves bouncing along the road, particularly on rough surfaces. The interior, too, was a tight squeeze. Though it could seat 4 people, they would have to be quite cozy to fit inside, as the cabin was extremely compact. The seats were minimal, and there wasn't much legroom or headroom, especially for taller drivers. The 360 was a vehicle meant for short trips around the city, not long journeys. Another quirky feature of the Subaru 360 was its two-stroke engine, which required a special blend of oil and gas, making it more maintenance-intensive than the typical four-stroke engines found in most cars. Its two-stroke nature also meant that the car emitted a distinct smoky exhaust, which added to the bug-like nature of the 360, as though it was constantly buzzing around in a cloud of its own making. The car was loud for its size, and the engine wasn't particularly refined, which made for a driving experience that was more raucous than smooth. Still, the Subaru 360's simplicity made it relatively easy to repair and maintain, a vital quality in the post-war period when parts were often scarce. But despite its lack of power and luxury, the Subaru 360 was a success for Subaru, becoming the best-selling car in Japan for several years during the 1960s. Its affordability, combined with its compact size, made it an ideal vehicle for city dwellers and people who needed a simple mode of transportation. The car's ladybug appearance and cheerful character also made it a hit with drivers who appreciated its personality and charm. It was a car that didn't take itself too seriously, and that sense of fun was reflected in how it was received by the public. Though it wasn't a great performer on highways or steep hills, the Subaru 360 made up for its shortcomings with its unpretentious nature and ability to get around in tight spaces. Today, the Subaru 360 is a beloved classic, though it remains a bit goofy in the eyes of many. It's hard to imagine a vehicle this tiny being taken seriously in the modern era, but the 360's endearing qualities, its bug-like shape, its diminutive size, and its quirky character have made it a nostalgic favorite for collectors and microcar enthusiasts. While it may not have been the most powerful or the most comfortable car ever built, the Subaru 360 will always be remembered as a symbol of post-war optimism, a reminder of a simpler time when cars were built to be affordable, practical, and yes, a little bit goofy. The Citroën Méhari, produced from 1968 to 1988, is one of the most iconic yet goofy vehicles in the history of French automotive design. At first glance, it's hard to take the Méhari seriously. With its lightweight, plastic-bodied construction, open-air design, and bright, playful colors, it looks more like something you'd rent for a day at the beach rather than a serious off-roader. But despite its toy-like appearance, the Méhari carved out its own unique niche, offering a quirky charm and a level of simplicity that set it apart from more conventional vehicles. The Méhari's most defining feature is undoubtedly its body, which was made of plastic. Citroën was ahead of its time in using fiberglass reinforced plastic panels to construct the car's body, making it lightweight and rust-resistant. While the material may seem unconventional, it gave the Méhari a distinctive, utilitarian look, one that was both rugged and childlike. The plastic body panels combined with the open-air design made it feel like something straight out of a beach resort or an amusement park. The bright, bold colors available for the Méhari, everything from sunshine yellow to vibrant orange and mint green, only added to the impression that it was more of a beach toy than a serious vehicle. The body's minimalistic design, with its angular lines and exposed framework, emphasized the car's simple, almost utilitarian nature, giving it a quirky charm that won over many. Under the hood, the Méhari was powered by a small 0.6-liter engine, which wasn't particularly powerful, but was more than adequate for its intended use. This engine produced a modest 29 horsepower, giving the Méhari a top speed of around 65 miles per hour. While this speed would hardly win any races, it was more than enough for the car's intended purpose. Leisurely drives on rural roads, beachside cruises, and off-road adventures. The Méhari's lightweight construction and relatively low power meant that it could handle rougher terrain and tight corners with ease, even though it wasn't exactly built for tackling extreme off-roading. Its rear-wheel drive configuration and simple suspension made it fairly capable on unpaved surfaces, though the ride was not particularly smooth due to the car's minimalist design. The open-air nature of the Méhari contributed to its fun, carefree personality. It was designed to be a car for the outdoors, perfect for sunny days, short trips, and leisurely drives with the wind in your hair. Its 4 seats were basic, with simple cushions, and there was very little in the way of comfort or luxury. The lack of windows or doors meant that the Méhari was far from practical for everyday use in less than ideal weather conditions. But that was part of its charm. It was a car for enjoying the outdoors, not for running errands or commuting. With the wind, the sun, and the open road in your face, driving the Méhari felt more like an experience than a necessity. Despite its simple design and lack of luxury features, the Citroën Méhari was highly functional for its intended purpose. It was especially popular in coastal areas and rural regions, where its lightweight construction and off-road capability made it ideal for navigating narrow, unpaved roads, beaches, and campsites. In fact, it was originally marketed as a recreational vehicle, a fun, utilitarian vehicle for people who needed something versatile, yet carefree. The Méhari quickly became a popular choice for people looking for a vehicle that could handle the great outdoors without the heavy weight or complexity of a traditional off-roader. In addition to its commercial appeal, the Méhari also saw service in military and police roles, where its simplicity and rugged nature were valued. However, while the Méhari was a practical vehicle for certain uses, it was hardly a car for the everyday driver. The lack of doors, windows, or any kind of climate control made it impractical for anyone who needed a vehicle for all weather conditions. On hot days, the lack of air conditioning made it feel like an oven. On rainy days, drivers and passengers were left exposed to the elements. The vehicle's minimal interior and lack of comfort features made it a bit of a chore for longer trips, though its short wheelbase and light handling made it ideal for quick jaunts and outdoor adventures. Today, the Citroën Méhari stands as a beloved classic, known for its quirky, carefree nature. It's hard to look at the Méhari without a smile creeping across your face. Its playful, colorful design, combined with its utilitarian simplicity, gives it an undeniable charm. Whether you love it or laugh at it, there's no denying that the Méhari left an impression. It's a car that was built with fun in mind, offering a level of freedom and adventure that was unparalleled in its day. While it may not have been the most practical or capable off-roader, it captured the spirit of the 1960s and 1970s. The Mini Moke, produced from 1964 to 1993, stands as one of the most eccentric vehicles to ever roll off a production line. Born from the iconic Mini, the Moke was originally designed as a lightweight utility vehicle for military and off-road use. However, what began as a practical solution quickly morphed into a quirky, stripped-down car that became more synonymous with tropical resorts and beach vacations than with rugged military operations. With its open-body design, minimalistic features, and undeniable resemblance to a beach buggy, the Mini Moke is both goofy and endearing in equal measure. At first glance, the Moke's design immediately stands out. It's as if someone took a standard Mini, removed almost everything non-essential, and then gave it a more rugged, open-air personality. The result? A vehicle that looks like it was designed for fun rather than functionality. The Moke's body was built with simple, flat panels and featured no doors or roof, offering an open-air driving experience from the moment you hopped in. It was lightweight and compact, giving it a quirky, utilitarian charm that made it a favorite in leisure settings, especially in sunny tropical locations where it was marketed as a resort vehicle. Its tiny size, minimalistic build, and lack of a roof or windows made it look like a cross between a golf cart and a dune buggy. Definitely not something you'd expect to see as a traditional car. The lack of doors, windows, and a roof was more than just a design choice. It was a practical necessity given the Moke's original purpose. When it was first launched, the Mini Moke was intended to be an inexpensive, utilitarian vehicle that could handle rough terrain. It was originally built for military use, with the idea that it could be easily transported and used in a variety of situations. The Moke's light frame, combined with its simple and functional design, made it suitable for driving on dirt roads and navigating difficult terrain. However, the military quickly found it didn't have the capabilities they needed, and it was soon relegated to civilian use, especially in tourist destinations and resorts. Its minimalism, while practical for certain environments, also gave it an almost childlike, toy-like quality that set it apart from other vehicles. The Moke's powertrain was as unassuming as its design. It was powered by a small 850cc engine, a far cry from the more powerful engines found in other off-road vehicles. With just 34 horsepower, the Moke's top speed was about 65 miles per hour, which was plenty for short trips along resort paths, beach roads, or scenic country drives. The low power output was a double-edged sword. While it meant the Moke wasn't exactly a high-performance machine, it also made the car incredibly easy to drive, with handling that was light, nimble, and perfect for short, leisurely jaunts. The ride was far from smooth, though, as the Moke's simple suspension and small wheels made it more prone to bouncing over uneven terrain. Still, that's part of the fun when driving such a quirky little car. It was all about the experience, not about comfort or practicality. One of the most notable features of the Mini Moke was its versatility in tropical and beach settings. While it wasn't built for high-speed off-roading or rough military combat, it excelled in environments where rugged simplicity was needed. In places like the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, and other resort-heavy locales, the Moke became synonymous with laid-back, vacation vibes. Tourists would rent the Moke to drive around the resort, taking in the sun and sea breeze with the wind in their hair. The Moke, in a way, became a symbol of a carefree lifestyle, a car you hopped into without a second thought, purely for the joy of driving. Despite its relatively low production numbers and niche appeal, the Moke gained a loyal following and remains a beloved classic today. Its goofy, almost cartoonish design has only grown in appeal over time, with enthusiasts and collectors appreciating the Moke for its simplicity, charm, and whimsical nature. The Mini Moke's combination of practicality and fun made it an unforgettable vehicle, and its use as a resort and beach vehicle only solidified its reputation as the ultimate fun car. It may not have been a serious off-roader, but it wasn't trying to be. It was a car that was meant to be enjoyed, one that prioritized enjoyment over speed, performance, and practicality. Today, the Mini Moke continues to be celebrated as one of the most fun and memorable vehicles ever made. Whether you see it as a toy car for adults, a piece of beach resort nostalgia, or just a quirky classic, the Moke remains a testament to a time when cars were made to make you smile, not just get you from point A to point B. It was goofy, yes, but that's exactly what made it so charming. The Mini Moke's open-air design, playful aesthetic, the 1967 Dodge Diora is one of the most outlandish and iconic custom cars to ever hit the streets, combining futuristic design with an undeniable sense of whimsy. Built on the platform of a Dodge A100 pickup, the Diora was far from a conventional vehicle. With its cab-forward design, radical styling, and quirky front-loading access, it resembled something more suited for a Hot Wheels track than a real-world road. The Diora's design pushed the boundaries of what people expected from an automobile, blending automotive innovation with a distinctly bizarre flair that made it stand out like few other cars of its time. The Diora's most eye-catching feature was undoubtedly its cab-forward design, a layout that placed the driver and passengers up front, with the cargo area extending to the rear. While the A100 pickup typically had a conventional truck design with the engine bay at the front and the cab behind it, the Diora reimagined this entirely by moving the cab forward and giving the vehicle an almost cab-over-truck feel. This gave the Diora an odd, elongated look that seemed to defy the traditional proportions of a car. The result was a strikingly futuristic appearance, one that didn't quite resemble any car or truck on the road at the time. The cab-forward design was not just visually unique, it also made the Diora feel like it came from another world. A glimpse of what future vehicles might look like, if not for their almost cartoonish proportions. The Diora's most functional quirk was its front-loading access. Instead of a traditional truck bed, the Diora had a large hinged front section that opened to reveal its cargo space. In a time when trucks and cars were all about practicality and straightforward design, the Diora's front-loading feature seemed like something out of a sci-fi film. While it may have been a bit impractical for everyday use, it added to the car's futuristic, almost otherworldly charm. The front-loading compartment, which could be accessed by lifting up the front of the car, was used to store various items in the back, adding to the vehicle's sense of whimsy and novelty. The Diora was a far cry from a utilitarian pickup truck. It was a show car that prioritized imagination and bold design over practicality. Another notable feature of the Dodge Diora was its striking custom paint job. The car was adorned with psychedelic, vibrant colors that seemed to reflect the free-spirited, countercultural movement of the 1960s. The bright, almost electric hues paired with bold, angular lines enhanced the futuristic aesthetic of the Diora. It looked as if the designers had plucked it straight from a comic book or animated movie, further adding to its playful, toy-like quality. The custom design, which was the brainchild of the legendary car customizer Gene Winfield, was a daring move that captured the imagination of car enthusiasts everywhere. It was a car that didn't just blend in with the crowd, it demanded attention and admiration, all while maintaining a sense of fun and fantasy. Despite its radical styling and futuristic design, the Dodge Diora was not exactly a practical vehicle. Its cab-forward design, while visually striking, likely made driving it less comfortable than traditional vehicles. The cramped forward position of the driver and passenger seats meant that legroom was limited, and the front-loading design, while interesting, was likely more of a showpiece than a truly functional feature. It may have turned heads at car shows and captured the imaginations of those who saw it, but the Diora was never intended to be a practical, everyday vehicle. Its purpose was to be a statement, a visual spectacle, and a tribute to the bold designs of the 1960s. In that sense, the Diora was more of an art piece than a traditional car. While the Dodge Diora was never mass-produced and remains a one-of-a-kind creation, It has had a lasting impact on car culture. Its unique design earned it a place in automotive history, not just as a quirky custom creation, but as a symbol of a time when designers were pushing the boundaries of what cars could look like. The Diora was the kind of car that made you stop and stare, not because of its speed or performance, but because it was just so delightfully strange. It embodied the spirit of the 1960s, a time when cars were becoming more than just machines. They were becoming statements of personality, design, and freedom. Today, the Dodge Diora is a collector's dream. It's a car that represents the bold, creative spirit of an era, a time when the future of automobiles seemed limitless. Though its goofy design may not have made it the most practical vehicle ever built, the Diora's outlandish look and show-stopping features made it a memorable piece of automotive history. Whether admired for its unusual form, its futuristic vision, or its connection to the world of Hot Wheels,